So, with our on the works of Christopher Tolkien, I would like to introduce our three panelists. The first you'll know as Andrew, who has is Cami Agan, and the third is Kristine Larsen. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about Christopher Tolkien's works, how he has expanded on his father's mythology, and ultimately what he has done for us too. So it's a commemoration. So I'd like to begin with Cami. You have a short statement that you would like to share with us about your experiences with Christopher.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Cami?
Yes.
Hi, hello.
Can you hear me well enough?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to be talking about my experiences with the BNF Tolkien Maker of Middle-earth exhibit. So I wanted to show off my membership card to the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, which allowed me to go numerous times to the exhibit. I'm going to read just to respect the time frame. My recent experience attending the Tolkien Maker of Middle-earth exhibit at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris underscored all the more clearly Christopher's vital work as his father's literary executive. As fate would have it, my arrival in France coincided with Christopher Tolkien's death, so that my first scheduled visit would be the day following. I spent that evening reading the outpouring of love, memories, and grief on various online sites. A link to the video of Christopher attending the unveiling of the Aubusson tapestries from last year was a highlight, as he expressed delight and deep appreciation for the tapestry's recreation of his father's work, another adaptation. In one online conversation, two scholars agreed that Christopher's death marked the passing of an inhabitant of Middle-earth, one of the last people in the primary world who lived through and contributed to the creation and revision of world, and who then spent much of his life giving us that same chance. The exhibit did not disappoint, as it provided ample space and vast historical, artistic, and biographical context for J.R.R. Tolkien's subcreation. Moving to the biographical section of the exhibit, I happened upon a group of teenagers with their teacher. They stood near the projected photos of the Tolkien family. Typical of the age group, some were taking notes, some listened, and others chatted or checked their mobiles. Quietly, their teacher informed her students that Christopher was responsible for the editing and publishing of Tolkien's posthumous works, and that il est mort hier, he died yesterday. A hushed and respectful silence fell. Students looked up from their phones. They looked again at their teacher. A profound sense of respect pervaded the group. She replied softly, oui, il est mort hier, il a 95 ans. Yes, he died yesterday, he was 95 years old. I sensed a change in them, a new attention to the photos and the history that surrounded the making of Middle-earth, and how much of that history we owe to Christopher Tolkien. Terms of the exhibit consciously turned to honor Christopher, with a nation that paid homage to the vast history known to us in such intricate detail because of his shepherding of the legendarium into the world. Visitors left the exhibit by passing through the vast backcloths Christopher worked to open for us, the much addended map of Beleriand, manuscripts of the Cottage of Lost Play and the Lay of Leithian, all framed by the massive Aubusson tapestry of Mithrim. In particular, the map of Beleriand held primacy of place, because for me, it is a telling snapshot of the collaboration of father and son in the construction of Arda. In some ways, the bittersweet feeling of visiting the exhibit on this particular day became a way of mourning and of elegizing Christopher's immense role in the creation and sustaining of the world we all feel we inhabit when we read. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we've got something prepared by Andrew as well, who's going to be talking about how Christopher has helped us in understanding Tolkien's languages and the progress and the journey that Tolkien went on and the EFL. So thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Will. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep, great. So I wanted to just spend a minute talking a little bit about something that's, of course, near and dear to my heart and what I love about studying Tolkien, which is his languages. And this is just a little treatment I wrote. As one of the Fellowship of Tolkien Scholars who has an intense interest and passion for the study of Tolkien's languages, I am indebted to Christopher Tolkien for entrusting the editing and publishing of his father's voluminous papers on his invented languages to a fellowship who are the founding fathers, if you will, of Tolkienian linguistics, and upon whose shoulders I and many others work. As Tolkien's language invention was inextricably linked to his mythopoeia, the task of publishing his father's many writings on the languages of Arda first fell to Christopher Tolkien through the editing and compilation of the History of Middle-earth series. And it was through this series that Christopher's work has gifted us with such crucial linguistic documents as the Lammas, so the account of the tongues, the etymologies, and Quendi and Eldar. However, Christopher realized that while he was fully equipped to bring together all the various narrative and poetic strands of Tolkien's legendarium, when it came to the over 3,000 pages of very specific and detailed language papers that still remained, as well as longer versions of documents he had already published in History of Middle-earth, he needed to find some help. And with these in terms of editing, deciphering, because we all know what Tolkien's handwriting could be like, and publishing in a helpful scholarly fashion. For example, Christopher describes in his father's manuscripts of the treatment of the Elvish language in the late 1930s, the etymologies, as thus: it must be reckoned among the most difficult of all the papers containing unique material which my father left. The inherent difficulties of the text are increased by the very bad condition of the manuscript, which for much of its length is battered, torn, crumpled at the edges, and discolored, so that much that was very lightly penciled is barely visible and extremely hard to decipher. Therefore, in 1992, Christopher Tolkien appointed a group of Tolkien scholars who showed interest in the nexus of his father's language to order, edit, and publish these papers. This group grew out of an early offshoot of the Mythopoeic Society that was called the Mythopoeic Linguistic Fellowship, which had been publishing a language-based journal called Parma el de Lambaran. In 1990, a new Tolkien language-focused journal, Vinyar Tangwar, Newsletters. Among the founding members of this group were Christopher Gilson, Patrick Wynne, Bill Wielden, Arden Smith, and Carl Hochstetter, who took over the editing of Vinyar Tangwar in 1989. In his very informative article for Tolkien Studies, 50 Years of Tolkienian Linguistics, Carl recounts how the special with Christopher Tolkien grew, and this is what Carl's written. This project began quite modestly, first with the correspondences I and Christopher Gilson maintained independently with Christopher Tolkien, as editors of our respective journals, concerned to keep him and the Tolkien estate aware of the publication, to ask questions about the linguistic materials already published, and in time to begin publishing some of the materials that had previously been collected from the Marquette archive. This early working relationship resulted in a proposal by Christopher Tolkien to Christopher Gilson to provide him with photocopies of the circa 1917 Gnomish lexicon from which Christopher had quoted in the glossarial appendices to the Book of Lost Tales, to produce a complete edition of this work for publication in Parma el de Lambaran. Gilson subsequently approached each of us in turn as an already established working group of like-minded colleagues, particularly with regard to interest in all stages of Tolkien's linguistic conception, who had moreover already had some experience in working with Christopher Tolkien, to publish materials from the archives. To participate in this publication with the approval of Christopher Tolkien, who sent installments of the Gnomish lexicon to us over subsequent months. It was not until 1992 that Christopher Tolkien proposed expanding the scope of this project to include eventually all of his father's linguistic writings for chiefly chronological presentation in chiefly Parma Elder Lembaron and Vinyard Tengwar, focusing on shorter, fragmentary, dislocated, and otherwise contextually more or less independent texts, such as those we ourselves collected from the Tolkien archives at Marquette University and the Bodleian Library. Therefore, from 1992 to the present day, with much more to come, it became the task of the editorial panel of the Elders Linguistic Fellowship to analyze and edit and publish Tolkien's language papers. And it is thanks to the foresight and trust of Christopher Tolkien that this crucially important resource and leaf of Tolkien's myth-making and creative thought is becoming available to us all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And finally, so Kristine, you come from not a literature background, but from an interdisciplinary background. So fascinated to find out how your views on how Christopher's work has helped develop interdisciplinary research into Tolkien.
Thank you. I assume you can hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. You're all familiar, of course, with the Velveteen Rabbit. I'd like to introduce you to the Velveteen book. This is my second copy. My first copy was loved so much that it literally fell apart. And I use Morgoth's Ring in much of my Tolkienian research, and I'm using it as an example of the entirety of the history of Middle-earth. And just to give you an idea, if you look at the table of contents of Morgoth's Ring and look at the various essays that are in there, you get a real feel for all of the different disciplines that have been impacted by Christopher putting together his father's papers. If you're interested in cosmology, the Ainu Lindale Sea Star, the round earth version of the cosmology, is in here. If you're interested in Tolkien and gender roles among the elves, the body-soul relationship, the right to die, then you want to read Laws and Customs Among the Eldar. If you're interested in discussions of mortality versus immortality, love between kinds, however one defines that, the afterlife and reincarnation, and even the possibility of extraterrestrial life, it's in here, in the Atherbeth Finrod Andreth. And if you're interested in the fall of humanity, in the theology of how humanity fell into sin in Middle-earth, you read the note to the Atherbeth in the Tale of Adnel. In the mistransformed essays, which is usually where my binding tends to die because I use it so much in here, you get alternative cosmologies, alternative myths for the creation of the sun and the moon. You have a story, a very haunting story about violence against women and the ravishing of the son, of Ari. You have his discussions on the nature of evil and Morgoth and what is the true power and evil of Morgoth. You have discussions of the nature of the Valar. You have those wonderful, complex, contradictory stories of the orcs. It's all in here. And of course, you also have the requisite philological notes that I will leave to the people interested in languages. And it's not just Tolkien's words that are so valuable about a volume from the history of Middle-earth like Morgoth's Rings. It's Christopher's notes, Christopher's analysis, Christopher's insight of trying to make what can be unintelligible intelligible. And the best part is that every once in a while, Christopher just throws up his hands and goes, I don't understand it either. And so he is playing scholar along with us and taking us along this journey to try to understand the entirety of his father's work. And I would just want to conclude by saying that the history of Middle-earth is critical for anyone studying Tolkien as a world builder, because you have in the history of Middle-earth, not just history, you have the entirety of Middle-earth.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kristine. So we've had three different perspectives on Christopher's work, what it's done so far to us. And I'd like to just grow on this a little bit by asking as well. So how has Christopher's work helped us understand the during Tolkien's lifetime, the Silmarillion was never published. But as soon as Christopher started to work on this, all of a sudden we had that background, the backcloth, and the depth that Tolkien liked to talk about in his lectures. So, Andrew, if I could pick on you, how has Christopher's work helped us understand the history of the legendarium in its development?
I think one of the, and I for the last couple of years, besides I did my thesis on the Book of Lost Tales, and I've been spending the last couple of years taking these wonderful Mythgard Academy courses that Corey Olson does at Signum University, where we've gone through each of the volumes of history. Actually, we're up to Morgoth String right now, which I've fallen behind on, but that's what they're working on. And one of the amazing things about Christopher is the way that he's very good at explaining the progress of the writings. Because I think for Tolkien, I read, I think Christina Scull said this one, the world changed in very slow ways. He didn't make it, basically he had one pattern that he kind of kept in. Then he kept nuancing and changing and thinking about that. When Tolkien originally was writing that, and he has the hobbits going out from the Shire, and originally they were supposed to encounter there. Tolkien actually stopped and he Black Horse, and of course that was the introduction of the Black Riders, which changed the whole kind of feel of the story. So Christopher is very good at showing that kind of progression. And throughout, it's really a map of how a man makes a myth, basically, in all those different levels. And what I like about Christopher is he knows when to put in some editorial, but he also knows when to just let Tolkien talk to Tolkien. But I think that layering, the way if someone reads the history of Middle-earth, they get that progression, they get that sense of how these stories develop, how new things were brought in and everything. But also the nuance of the changes too, I think is very interesting.
Excellent. Andy, how about yourself? Chris, work on
you're breaking up.
I'm
going to turn off my camera.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost you for a second there. So I got you back.
Okay, so Cami, I'd like to offer you ask you the same question. So how has Christopher helped us understand the legendarium?
It's almost an overwhelming question. So what I did in preparing was thinking about, even if we only had the Silmarillion and unfinished tales, the vast amount of material that we would have even with just those 2 volumes. And it gives us the creation, it gives us a vision into the Blessed Realm. It features various falls of Morgoth, of the Noldor, the exile, the return to Middle-earth, and then a wealth of detail, I think, on Numenor. And I think the Second Age is really, in some ways, still the least developed scholarly. So I would really be interested in hearing people's reflections on that. I just started rereading Unfinished Tales, and the tale of Aldarion and Erendis is absolutely magnificent. And it gives us sort of the telescoped vision rather than the global vision that we get from the Akallabeth. And so even if those 2 volumes were all that we had, it would be a lifetime of work just to examine the way flesh has been put on the bones of these illusions that we see in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And this is something I'll be talking about in a little bit, that I think it's easier for us now to see what the past means to the characters within the secondary world, now that we have all of these manuscripts, whether we think of them as manuscripts from Arda or manuscripts in Tolkien's rooms. It gives us a sense of their reality and their history and what it means when they cite or allude to them in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and I think that's extremely useful. I think it's also interesting that we also see Christopher's process now that we have had 14 volumes or so, and more to come potentially. We see his focus on getting us the Silmarillion in a particular way. And then later, I think this is really interesting from the standpoint of the editor, apologizing in some ways and admitting that he feels he had made errors in various choices he had made in the publication of the Silmarillion. And I found that really astonishing. And so we have both the process of writing from J.R.R. Tolkien, we have the way the secondary world characters view that past, and then we have Christopher's process as well. So we have at least 3 ways of looking at Arda now, thanks to the appearance of all of these volumes.
Yeah, I liked your the point about kind of like his work allows us to have that telescope view and sometimes the more grander view as well. So you think about kind of like the Beren and Luthien song that Aragorn recites in the Fellowship of the Ring, and then you get the Lay of Luthien, which, you know, is hundreds of pages long, so you really get that narrow view. That's really interesting. Thank you. I'd like to add, obviously there is the legendarium, but we also have a vast range of texts that Tolkien edited and he worked on throughout his life. And I'm curious as to how, what you think maybe Christopher's editing and work on the non-legendarium text has maybe helped with us. How it has helped us understand Tolkien's sources and influences. So rather than picking up on someone who would like to go first.
I'll just make a point of because again, I come at a lot of this stuff from looking at a cosmological view, and I pick up a work like, you know, about King Arthur, and I go, oh, I'm not going to find much in here, and I'll be darned if I find it in there. It's all, Tolkien is Tolkien. He was an incredible polymath. He knew everything. He was interested in everything. He was a sponge who just soaked up all of these incredible references. And you have to feel so badly for Christopher, because in order to understand his father, you have to sort of be that polymath as well and drag everything in and see all of these connections. So I think that in seeing what Christopher has done with the non-legendarium works makes you appreciate the magnitude of the job and just how incredible of a job it was, even for the man's son to be able to have done that.
But I've got to say, I've got to put in a plug for a book that Christopher worked on that's non-Tolkienian. That's one of my favorite treatments of an Old Norse saga. I mean, this is a brilliant book, and if you look in this book, the way Christopher edits it is very much like the way he edits History of Middle-earth, the saga of King Hedrick the Wise. Brilliant, brilliant book, edited by Christopher Tolkien. You know, so, yeah.
Yeah, so he was still working within that kind of same scope as what his father was, but he wanted to contribute outside as well. So we often perhaps see Christopher as the heir to his father's legacy, but you know, in a few ways he did actually have his own he did create his own path as well, which is just, well, it's just phenomenal that he was able to do that with the weight of his father's legendarium. We do have a question as well that's just popped up, so aware of the time, I'd just like to, so if anyone has maybe 1 or 2 questions that we could perhaps pose to the panel. Okay, we've got 2. So first is our first speaker, actually. So Paul Godfrey, I'm just allowing you to talk. Yep, so Paul, over to you.
Got me?
Yep.
Got me? Right. A bit of background on this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
A bit of background on this. Back in 1982, when I was working on Children of Húrin, Christopher Tolkien sent me advanced copies of the material for History of Middle-earth, and continued to do so while I was working on the text of the Silmarillion cycle, among them being some excerpts from the prose version of Beren and Luthien, was written in the 1950s, following the revision of the Lay of Luthien. This has never been published at all. And there are obviously various bits of Tolkien's legendarium which have not yet been seen the light of day. And I'm rather hoping that with Christopher's death, there is not going to be a long pause while these are actually investigated. I was rather disappointed that all the better the review passages were not included in the standalone volume. Hello?
Hello. So unfortunately, a lot of that was a bit glitchy. My internet's just playing up at the moment. As would any of the other panelists like to answer?
Well, we do. There are rumors of something on the horizon that wasn't edited by Christopher, but might have some of Tolkien's late writings in it, although we're not quite sure when or where that's coming out, but there is a rumor about that, I know, in surfacing.
So yeah, we've got that additional one as well. And okay, so I'm just a bit aware of time and just trying to make sure that we stay on track in this particular half. I would just like to take a second to thank our three panelists for coming to join, if briefly, the works and the life of Christopher Tolkien. So thank you, Andrew, thank you, Kristine, and thank you, Cami. Obviously, we're going to hear from Cami and Kristine later on today as well, so thank you very much.
Thank you.